and welcome to Newsnight, where we speak to major players in Nigeria's democracy and the issues raised by its drive for growth and development. I am Ladi Akeredoluwale. It's our pleasure to have you join us today. 33 states of the Federation are reported to be affected by flooding, which has led to loss of lives and property, as well as a massive displacement of people across the country. My guest on the program today says his state in Nigeria's south-south geopolitical zone is now one big IDP camp. My guest also says this perennial problem can only be tackled by cooperation at various levels of government to desilt rivers Niger and Benue, as well as to build dams. Newsnight talks to the governor of Bayelsa State, Senator Diri. Your Excellency, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Your state is facing what some people would describe as a somewhat existential threat because so many of the citizens are affected. From the reports we have, about 300 communities are affected by flooding at the moment. You have been touring some of these areas in the last couple of days. What has been your impression of what has happened?
Well, my impression is that it is a disaster. It is monumental. And the impression I have is that this would have been averted if governments before even now, we are not just blaming governments today, because this has been a perennial occurrence. If governments before now are taking this issue seriously, we wouldn't have had what we have in our hands today in terms of some permanent solutions to the perennial problem of flooding in the Niger Delta and in particular in my state, the state of Bayelsa.
What have you seen? How are the people coping? As you said, perhaps if efforts had been made. In the case of this year's flood, there were those who pointed out that some of the agencies, the Nigerian Meteorological Services Agency, the Hydrological Services, had issued warnings earlier in the year to some of the states that would be affected, and therefore to give them an opportunity to try to prepare. Did you receive these warnings? And if so, what kind of preparations did Bayelsa State make ahead of this situation?
Yes, we did receive the warnings. Yes, we did take proactive actions, but the flood this year was beyond what anybody could have imagined. And what I was also saying was that preparing of higher grounds, and as I speak with you, there are no higher grounds, even the areas that were there as higher grounds, which hitherto in 2012 were used, are all submerged. And so, yes, we received the warnings, but I don't believe that warning is the solution to the problems of Bayelsa and other states that have been flooded. I believe that the federal government needs to sit with the governors of these states and look at permanent solutions to this perennial flooding, rather than saying we want them. Yes, you want us, and the best we could have done was to say, okay, prepare some higher grounds. And that means that we'll still have internally displaced people. We'll still have people who will pack out of their homes. And that is not actually the solution to our problem. The solution to our problem is that we must look for a way to either absorb this water by building a dam or to distill our rivers so that they can actually swallow the waters when it occurs.
You mentioned the fact that sometimes some of the past governments in some of the states and in general in the region and probably even federally could have done more before now to address some of those challenges. And now you've talked about the issue of a dam and so on. What going forward, because now there's a crisis situation, not just in Bayelsa, in rivers, in Delta, and so on. Are you working with your brother governors in the Niger Delta states, for example, to start off with, to see what it is that you can do, at least in the interim? Because in the case of Bayelsa, the reports are out there. Our correspondent there, of course, filed in, a report indicating that the situation has gotten so bad that the flood has washed out some of the corpses in some of the cemeteries onto the road, raising a different issue of possible epidemics if this is not addressed. So it's an emergent situation, isn't it?
Of course it is. I can tell you, my dear brother, yes, other states are affected, particularly my neighbors. Take, for instance, Rivers State. Rivers State has 24 or so local governments, about 23 or so local governments. And out of that number, not more than 4 local governments are affected. And so the issue is not the same with Bayelsa State. And the same goes for Delta State. So what we are grappling with here is not in the same magnitude with River State and with Delta State. Thank God you have gotten some of the information about what is happening here. Yes, we had a situation like that in the cemetery, and immediately we moved in, and that has been taken care of. As we speak to you, there is no high ground here in Bayelsa. Even in government house here, we are threatened. We just have about 2 or 3 steps for the flood to overrun government house. So we resort to faith, and then we're also believing that the water is getting stagnant, and we hear from Lokoja and other places it has started abating. And if that happens, we are sure that even in this state, in the next 1 week or so, we will have some degree of relief. That's all we are looking at. Working with my colleague governors, everybody is also struggling to see how best they can take care of their own citizens. I saw the governor of Delta State, visiting IDP camps. And we call up ourselves and encourage each other to ensure that we are not actually what's happening in our region.
Do you have IDP camps in Bayelsa State? If so, how many, where are they, and how are you trying to fund them to provide food and other basics to people who are affected? As you said, the magnitude in Bayelsa is higher than that of those of your brother governors.
Every community in Bayelsa is an IDP camp, to begin with. However, in Yenagoa, the capital city, we have designated some IDP camps. In particular, we have a place we call the Oxbow Lake, which was used as an event center, where today that place has been opened for IDPs, and you don't have less than 2,000 IDPs in that camp. And you also have all of our secondary and primary schools that are not yet flooded. All of those schools have been used as IDP camps at Igbogene, where I visited, and in other communities within the Yenagoa city metropolis. And so, not an exaggeration, every community is an IDP camp. And that's why the task force, together with the State Emergency Management Agency, they keep distributing foodstuffs to every local government area, to every community, because no community is left out. Same also goes for the medicines and pharmaceuticals. The Ministry of Health is on top of that, and working with SEMA, they are also going around to ensure that we don't have a serious health crisis on our hands. But just as you rightly mentioned, with the post-flood, there will be a lot of anticipated sicknesses, which I think that we will start handling even from now through the Ministry of Health and other organizations, Red Cross and others who are resident in the state. So whilst we are grappling with the current situation of hunger, of want, and of homelessness, we are equally looking at the post-flood rehabilitation, reconstruction, and occurrence of diseases.
How much assistance have you received? Because you mentioned there the State Emergency Management Agency, but we also know that you've got parastatals like the National Emergency Management Agency, which was set up for this kind of purpose. You have the Ministry of Disaster Management and Preparedness and all that. Have you received any kind of help or any kind of support from them since this broke out? Because as you said, it does look as if Bayelsa State is one big IDP camp at the moment. There is no higher ground, and so unless the water recedes, there is really very little that can be done in terms of moving forward, as it were.
For now, we are yet to receive from the federal government, but we are not unaware of the fact that after my broadcast, Mr. President has given directives for all federal agencies, ministries, and departments to immediately come to the aid of Bayelsa State. Thereafter, I put a call across to the Director General of NEMA. I spoke with him, and he also assured me that they are doing everything to see what they can also bring to Bayelsa State. But for now, we are yet to receive any of those assistance from them. But I am still very hopeful, and I believe that the assistance will eventually come to Bayelsa, because everyone is showing that concern about the state of inhuman living that we have now. People who are hungry, who are homeless, and of a people who are actually cut off from all fronts, except by our maritime axis. So, as I said, I'm hopeful that some succor will still come from the federal agencies.
I have had the privilege of visiting Bayelsa State once or twice. But for our international audience who may not be too familiar with Bayelsa State, in your state, first of all, there's more water than land. And even where you have land, as you've just described, most of it is low-lying areas. Can you give us more context in terms of what challenge in particular Bayelsa State faces? I mean, flood has brought it to the forefront of national discussions, but in terms of infrastructure and in terms of how this kind of state can grapple with survival given its topography, give us some context about why it seems as if the flooding is more severe in Bayelsa than in any of the other Niger Delta states.
Well, I like to begin by letting our audience know, particularly the international audience, that Bayelsa is the center of oil and gas in Nigeria. Bayelsa is the first place where oil was struck in commercial quantities that made Nigeria an oil-producing country. And up until today, Bayelsa remains as one of those key states that produce oil and gas. And in fact, today, Bayelsa is richer in gas than any other state. That accounts for what Bayelsa is to Nigeria and indeed to the world. But having said that, I believe that Bayelsa should not depend on only road transport, one. Bayelsa should actually be a state that will have some kind of dual transportation, both in terms of the maritime and and road transport. But the fact I will still hang on to here is that this perennial flooding that displaces our people virtually every year can actually be controlled from the federal government, working with the Bayelsa state government and other affected states. As I said earlier, there are just two ways about it. We must construct dams in River Niger, in River Benue. We must go on to distill the rivers. You have two rivers that affect Bayelsa through the River Niger. You have River Non and River Forcados. If those two rivers are distilled, I am very sure that we will have this problem at our backs. So the challenges we have is still that of the federal government working with us. Bayelsa State is not an autonomous country. If we were to take our decisions, we already know what to do. But because we are still in a federation called Nigeria, we need Nigeria to speak with us, to work with us, to ensure that this problem is put behind us.
You declared a 7 days break, as it was called, for the workers and did others who are working in the formal sector in Bayelsa State. Given the gravity of what has transpired, it does appear as if that is just a pause. There might not be an opportunity for those people to go back to work anytime soon, except, as you pointed out, the water recedes. So what's the plan over the next week or two for Bayelsa State and the various categories of the citizens, even as you point out that even Government House, where you're talking to us from today, if the water does not recede, if for any reason the forecast is to be believed, because I've looked at the forecast in the run-up to this interview, and for the next couple of days, there's also prediction of rain still to come. One can only hope that that doesn't really happen so that the water can recede. What is the plan over the next, shall we say, 2 weeks from the state government perspective to keep things going while we wait for the support that you said Mr. President has promised your state?
Well, let me make this very clearly. Rainwaters contribute very minimally towards the flooding of the states, very minimally. And the moment it rains, maybe after some few hours, you still see the rainwater drying up. The major issue here of flooding is the waters that are released from various dams, be they from Cameroon, be they from Lado, or wherever they are released from. And so for me, the rains are not the main issues that cause the flooding of Bayelsa State. But we have put a lot in place, and what we have put in place in terms of the task force and in terms of the State Emergency Management Agency, all of which are doing their duties right now, is just to mitigate the effects of our people, going hungry, and our people who are homeless in terms of supplies, not only of foodstuffs, of mattresses, of blankets, and taking care of their health. That will continue for as long as the flooding will last. And so I also heard the forecast, and we know that man will always forecast, but God has the final say. And I believe that in no distant date from now, the waters will also abate.
I want to take you up on what you pointed out about what the more permanent solution is going forward and the need for two things, if I have you right, that you mentioned. You talked about desilting and you talked about the building of dams. Now, those two projects are quite capital intensive and I don't know, I mean, this is still an ongoing development. So I want to ask you, is there anything, incidentally, all of you the governors from that zone and from the states that are affected are from the same political party, so it shouldn't be so difficult for you to sit down to talk about this. In conjunction with an agency like the NDDC and the Ministry of Niger Delta Affairs to put together the funding to begin to build this, because even if, as you said, the rains recede, the water recedes, and things return to some kind of normalcy this time, we can expect the same or even worse next year if the situation remains the same. So is there any plan, as it were, already? Because you are, shall we say, one of the newer governors, so your term of office is still, fairly elastic. Some of your colleagues may not be in office beyond May next year. But is there any plan for you and your brother governors to begin to put this infrastructure in place with, in partnership with all these agencies? Because this is now seemingly very, very urgent.
Well, as you are aware, NDDC has become more of a political vehicle than a development vehicle. You are aware that the governors of this region, from the day I even took over as governor, and even before then, have been calling on the federal government to follow the constitution, the act that sets up the NDDC. And that act stipulates that there will be a board of the NDDC. And even the governors will form an advisory board. But as we speak up until today, NDDC has been run by sole administrators, which is alien to the act setting up the NDDC. And just yesterday, we have been told that a new sole administrator has been appointed. And so clearly, NDDC, the way it is being run today, is not a panacea to the problems of the Niger Delta, the way it is being run today. And I don't think that that's what the founding fathers of NDDC had planned for the region. You are very correct. NDDC would have been a vehicle that we would have used, we are working with the governors of the region and with the federal government to actually solve some of these issues that are actually truly beyond the capacity of any one state government to handle. And here we are talking about, like you said, very capital-intensive projects of dam construction and dredging of rivers. So I don't think that going forward, within this short period, any reasonable thing will be achieved. But my prayer is that let us have very peaceful elections. Let us have free, transparent, fair elections, particularly at the federal level, where we will have a new president to be elected by sometime in February. And I will still be here as governor, so certainly we will give some little leadership with the governor of Edo, who also will still be on his seat, so that we can together take this problem to the federal government and see what plans we can have to settle and resolve the issues of perennial flooding in the Niger Delta region.
I'm happy you mentioned that, because that was going to be my next port of call. Because all of this that you've mentioned, all what we have discussed so far, especially in terms of the flooding and the emergence, and what you mentioned when you talked about the fact that previous governments, particularly at the level of the federal government, have not really dealt with this problem. And that's why someone like you is having to face it, having come into office not too long ago. But let me now come to the politics of it and the issues on the ground. But first, I want to deal with the Niger Delta itself. Another big problem that is being faced by the people of the Niger Delta right now is environmental pollution. Now, whether that pollution is caused by activities, and I've seen you several times in several communities in Bayelsa State really crying for help, particularly against the activities of some of those who are exploring for oil in the communities, and when these quote unquote accidents happen and the communities are polluted. Most of the people in Bayelsa are naturally fishermen. But if the waters are polluted, and we have graphic pictures from that area which show that a lot of the area is polluted, what is happening on that level? Especially because that has now been exacerbated by crude oil theft. Those who are non-state actors who are actually just, punching into the pipelines and carrying away the oil. The oil companies you can go after, but how do you go after those ones?
People just feel that, well, we do not have access to it. So if we go on to do oil bunkering and all of those stealing or aiding those who are stealing, because even the oil theft is not limited to the people from the Niger Delta. The major thieves of the oil are actually not even from the Niger Delta. The boys who aid them here collect the peanuts. So the environmental degradation is such that for me, we need to halt everything. And in halting everything, we keep appealing to our people that oil bunkering is also further degrading our environment. Like you said, graphically, when you go around, you see literally oil flowing on top of our waters. Be they rivers, be they lakes, everywhere is being polluted. The whole environment is gone. Recently, you remember the ITO oil spill,
yes,
which lasted for about a month. So it's a very big challenge to us.
The other question, of course, I will ask in that case is that if, as it is now, as you said, Bayelsa is virtually at a standstill, but perhaps there is a need to discuss contingency plans. As you were speaking there, what occurred to me is that if, the vehicle of government, which is Government House in Yenogwa itself, could possibly be under threat, then from where will all the coordination that is necessary to keep the rest of the communities going, where will it happen? So I want to ask the question, is it possible that we could be thinking of evacuations, even if temporarily, to address this? And is your government putting its mind towards that? Bayelsa is populous, but it's a small state, and some would say it's manageable if you have to move your people away out of harm's way until the water recedes.
The answer is a no, no, no.
Why is it no?
Well, even in the Bible, our Lord says he established the land and created the land from the floods and the seas. So we are okay where we are. And let me tell you this. The people of my state, the communities in my state, they are all flooded, but they all still live in those communities. And any attempt to remove any one of them from their own communities, you will be met with very stiff resistance. So I don't believe that Bayelsa should have an auxiliary plan for relocation. No, I don't believe so. Because the people are resilient and the people are very sure that this will also come to pass in no distant time.
If you have had flooding in the past, I guess that would explain why you have the viewpoint that people, would resist being moved.
No, not just a viewpoint. Excuse me, not just a viewpoint. I'm saying that is what the people are. If you're a cameraman, I'm sure they would have told you, because we have channels, cameramen here.
Indeed.
You go to our communities, the people are there taking out a living out of this flooding. And so it is not just my view, it is a belief system. They are, like you rightly said, they have seen floods over and over. It's just that the flood this year is overwhelming.
What do we then do, Governor Diri? There are a lot of people who are listening to you right now, and and many of them would be wondering how do we come into this? How does Bayelsa? How can we help in Bayelsa's case? What can we do specifically? You used to be in the National Assembly. You're a senator, and of course, the budget process is ongoing in the National Assembly as we speak. For 2023. And here we are talking, you and I, about dams and desilting and all of that. So again, are you going to be speaking to your former colleagues in the National Assembly about this to try to get some funding in the budget for this purpose at the federal level? Then there are your brother governors in other states, even outside the Niger Delta, who are not directly affected by flooding and who may be able to say, okay, look, we can do this and so on. What is your, should I call it, appeal to them? What are you asking these various categories of people for in the case of Bayelsa State as you sit today in Yenagoa in Government House? What is it that they can do to help alleviate this situation? Because I know you are putting a brave face on it, but as you pointed out at the start of the interview, there's a lot of problem on the ground right now.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are doing everything within our own powers, within our own reach. Nigeria, as we know, is a federation, but we run this country more like a unitary system of government, where the peculiarities of the federating units are ignored. Some people may say we are insensitive in the way we run our federation. And this is a peculiarity to Bayelsa State. Even whilst I was in the National Assembly, this issue has been on the table. And even today, it is still on the table in the National Assembly. The senator representing Bayelsa West Senatorial District, and who also was the former governor of the state, has also brought this to the fore in the National Assembly. Very recently, I saw a long letter he wrote, to the Senate President, the President, calling on the President, Senate President, and others to address the issues in Bayelsa and indeed in the Niger Delta region. The Bayelsa caucus in the House of Reps have also done similar things. And so the issue is whether or not we see ourselves, with the peculiarities that we have in each of our regions. Sometimes people are tempted to think that, okay, if this is happening in some other regions, maybe the response would have been swifter than what we are seeing in Bayelsa. People are tempted to think that maybe because it doesn't affect others, and that is why it keeps falling on deaf ears from successive governments. But I want to believe that this year's proportion of the flood is something that even if you are a deaf, you will hear. And from what I've been told, about 33 states of the Federation are affected, even though the magnitude is not the same. So for me, the way forward is that, one, the Federal Republic of Nigeria, where we are a federating state, will have to take this issue on a front burner. The front burner to the effect that budgets have to be made, studies have to be made on the construction of either the construction of dams or the distilling of our rivers in those states that are affected. Again, the immediate succor that the state needs from federal agencies such as NEMA and the humanitarian ministry should not waste any time to get into Bayelsa State. For me, these are the few things I'll propose for now pending when we see the reactions from our own federal government.
I must then ask you, because a number of the points that you have raised in your answer to the last question are political. And that brings me to what you mentioned earlier when you talked about you are wishing and you pray that there will be a free, fair, and transparent election come February next year. Now, I want to ask, do you think that flood apart, that's just the most current of the challenges. We have been dealing with security challenges before flood came along. Do you think, because I've asked everyone I've spoken to amongst your colleagues about this, do you think that those security challenges will allow for a free, fair, and transparent election of the manner that you are speaking of, since we know that this is also something else that is affecting virtually everyone, and that the flooding has only come to compound what was already a very difficult situation?
Well, as a state governor, I would not like to speak beyond my limits. I may not know and understand what the federal government is doing in terms of security in other states. But strictly speaking about my state, except on this issue of flooding, security-wise, I'm sure that Bayelsa State is prepared for the 2023 elections. I've held Security Council meetings with the federal security agencies that are here in the state. And I think that in Bayelsa, we can actually hold 2023 elections, all things being equal, particularly believing that the flood would have abated before the fixed dates of the elections, which will start about February 2023. So I can only speak for my state. I don't want to speak in terms of security across Nigeria.
Given the fact that you want to speak for your state, then I will ask you to speak for your state in this respect as well. What are the chances that your party, because we cannot but mention that, and I did mention it earlier on when we talked about the Niger Delta, and I mentioned that many of your colleague governors are of the same political persuasion as you. I assume, of course, when you were saying that elections are free, fair, and transparent, that the result that would confirm that to you is one that first in Bayelsa, at the level of the National Assembly, and then, of course, nationally, is the one where your party emerges victorious. And so that you also have the political heft to put into action the plans that you've talked about in terms of bringing some of the issues as they concern the Niger Delta to the front burner going forward?
Well, except you are not a party man, everybody who comes through a political party, and particularly in our own system here, where we don't have independent candidates, we all come through political parties. And for me, occupying such an exalted office as the office of a governor, the only wish I will have and which I will work towards is for my party to emerge in the presidential elections. And you are very correct, you are very right, because in all of this, if I have a president from my party that I can access, a president from my party that has promised restructuring, that's one selling point for the candidate of the PDP, and which is in tandem with the wishes and the views of the people of the Niger Delta, and indeed of the Ijaw ethnic nationality. We have for long called for restructuring of this country. And we believe that some of the challenges that we have are because we do not have the opportunity to address them. They are either in the exclusive legislative list. We cannot legislate on them. We cannot touch them. And so the selling point for the PDP candidate is that he has promised restructuring. And that has hooked him to me and to most of us from the Niger Delta region. And so there is no gainsaying the fact that if my party is forming the government at the center, I want to believe that we will have the wherewithal to go along first as a state and then as a region to Mr. President and the federal government, and to ensure that the issues that have bedeviled this country are actually given a decision, not just talking about them again, because we have talked for too long. These issues are not new to any Nigerian. Let decisions be taken at that level. Let us have restructuring. Let us have devolution of powers to the states. Let us have federating units, having some measure and degree of autonomy to address issues that are peculiar to them. I think that way, even the issues of security will also be solved.
How do you respond to those who say that if we go down that route, we may be working towards the possible dissolution of the country or dismemberment of the country? Because once you have, at the state level, you have individual police forces for the states. They have control over their resources. They only pay royalty to the center. That the unity purpose of the federation called Nigeria might be affected, given our antecedents from being not ethnically homogeneous, being multi-religious, and being diverse of interests, and that we haven't got yet that central authority that will keep us all going while we have all these arguments and debates about how far to carry on restructuring.
For me, if I will answer your question, is that the road we have traveled for 60 years. Are we actually not traveling towards the dissolution of the country? You are trying it and it's not working out. It's not working out. We have traveled this road of a unitary government called federal government for years and it's not working out. Can't we try the other side of it? There are always two sides to a coin. I don't think that if federating units have their police, that will lead to dissolution of the country. I don't think that, let us face it, before Nigeria, we had our own ethnic cleavages, and you cannot wipe them away any day, any time. You cannot wipe them away. We can only accommodate each other. And that's what we have been doing. And then we now, through a military regime, because in the military, it is a central command structure that has even dipped into our own democracy. So my only take is that let us try the other side of the coin.
Well, if we're going to try the other side of the coin, Your Excellency, and I know that you have pointed out that I have drawn you away from where you wanted to restrict yourself. That is true, but I have done that because there's a linkage between all these issues, as we have found out. As you said, we've traveled this road for quite a while. There's a linkage, and that's why it's inevitable that we must discuss one in order to be able to fully understand the other. And that's why, as we wind the interview down, I then want to ask you this. Going forward, we've talked a bit about 2023 and some of the salient issues. But as a governor, one of the nation's 36 governors, what is it that the Nigerian voter should be on the lookout for, in your view, in determining how they select their leaders, and not just the president? I'm talking about leaders at the state level, the state governors, members of the state assembly, the National Assembly. What for you, if you were to pick two existential issues that anybody who wants to occupy any of those positions is to tackle, what would those be? I suspect that you will mention restructuring as one of them, but let me allow you a respond.
Well, you have already mentioned one. You have already mentioned one. That's number one to me, and number one to most of us who are in this part of the country. And then the other thing has to do with the character of whoever that will be president. Will the president be a president for Nigerians? Is the president that has the experience, the wherewithal to appreciate and understand the diverse and diversity of this country, and will be able to take every other sector along in his governance? Because we have seen a government of the APC that is winding down. I'm not used to using insolent languages on governments, because every government has its own challenges, and unless that you are on that seat, you may not understand. But we have seen the performance of the APC government for 7 years, now moving towards the final year, which is the 8th year. Is that the kind of government that a voter will want to vote to continue? So for me, every voter should ask himself, where we are today, should there be continuity? If you convince yourself that the answer is yes, go ahead and vote for continuity. But if you convince yourself to change, the change. Thank you.
Your Excellency, I want to thank you so much for your time on the program today. We wish Bayelsa State well with this flooding problem, and we do hope that as time goes on, you receive all the help that has been promised and all the help that is required to bring succor to the people affected. Thank you for your time today.
Again, thank you for having me, and I wish you the best.
That's our program today. We would, of course, like to hear from you on the conversation. Our social media handles are right there on your screen. You can also listen to this and previous episodes of the program via our podcast. Please visit our website, channelstv.com/podcast to get started. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. Goodbye.